In this video, we're going to go over the 3D Coat Applink connection plugin for Modo that's been completely rewritten recently. We're going to first start by covering the installation process. So I'm going to go to 3D Coat's main page, click the Download tab, then the Applinks tab here, choose the Applink, and then click on the Modo icon. You will now see the link for this new Applink connection plugin, as well as a link to the forum thread that covers discussion and also updates to the new Applink. Once we have downloaded that, it will be a zip file. So what you would want to do is go to the System menu, click on Open User Folder, then in the Kits folder, you would extract or copy the contents of that Applink zip file, and it would be named CoatLink. Once that's done, you would restart Modo, and you should find the Applink icon in the Kits toolbar. If you're on Modo 12 or later, you can store the icon in your workbench so it's more easily accessible. By clicking on the Edit Workbench icon here, and then the list menu, you would choose Pick to Add. You would need to have the Kits toolbar visible in order to do that. So you could pick it, choose Pick to Add, then click on the Applink icon in the Kits toolbar. Once you click on that, this is the panel that you'll get. The top section of the panel is for exporting meshes depending on the task a user wants to perform. The second section is for importing meshes and/or texture maps back into Modo. Then you have settings where you can allow 3D Coat to launch automatically, and you would set the application exe file here, as well as designating the exchange or the temporary folder. When you export out of 3D Coat to come back into Modo, you would want that export location to be the same as what you have set here. The Applink manual gives you a general suggestion as to where to place the file based on your OS, but it's not set in stone. And you can scroll through and look at the different options here. Let's go back to the top, and as I mentioned before, based on the action that you want to perform inside of 3D Coat, you can send it directly to that particular workspace. So for example, if we wanted to do some texture painting using the per pixel painting method in 3D Coat, we could check that here. We could use micro vertex, which is based on displacement map painting in the depth channel, whereas per pixel painting is primarily for normal map relief, but it does have displacement map capability, so you could choose either one. PTEX, drop as a reference mesh. This is the one that I would recommend not using because this is an old legacy option where it would drop a high poly mesh essentially into the paint workspace, and it's not really designed to handle very dense models. You can, but again, it's not ideal. The sculpt room is a better location for that. You have different options. You can ghost the voxel object where you can't do that with the reference object. There's just a number of different things that you can do, and it's more flexible. If you need to make changes to the reference object, you can do that in the sculpt workspace where you don't really have many options for the reference mesh. So again, I would suggest just sending it to the sculpt workspace if you want to use it as a reference object. We will look at these options separately in a second video, but now let's look at the options of getting it back from 3D Coat. The older Applink did not allow the user to start from 3D Coat and send a model they may have created there to Modo. You would have to start in Modo in order to use the Applink. With this newly rewritten Applink, that is no longer the case. You may originate from either application. Another major limitation of the older Applink is that the texture maps imported from 3D Coat were not set up properly. It would require a fair amount of manual configuration. This Applink resolves that problem and has your materials largely set up and ready to render, depending on the material preset you choose. For example, if you have V-Ray as one of your renderers, you could choose to bring it in as a V-Ray material and it will set that up accordingly. And then you have options for GITF, Unity, and Unreal. Each section has the appropriate button to initiate the export or import, and they are correspondingly labeled push and pull. Here is a list menu with the options to either update all incoming materials or have the Applink ask per new UV map. Here is an option to import materials which you would naturally want to uncheck if you only want to import a mesh into Modo. Here you can choose to import mesh along with UV maps, and you would decide whether to replace geometry, replace a mesh item, or add as a new mesh item. I'm going to take an object that I already have texture painted, which is this wasp that's set up in 3D Coat, and I'm going to send it to Modo. In this case, since we're starting from 3D Coat from scratch, then we would choose Export to Modo. We're using the same folder that was recommended, and you'll notice that it sends it as an LWO file instead of an OBJ, but you could change that if you want. Export geometry is checked. Typically, what you do is you would choose a preset here. If you're rendering, the best option is to choose Modo Specular. Metalness is fine if you are going through Modo to get it to a game engine, but again, Modo Specular is the best option if you're trying to render inside of Modo. Also, if you wanted to render in V-Ray in Modo, you would choose one of these V-Ray presets, like V-Ray Standard GGX. Whether or not you want it to be subdivided, Export Low Mesh will be the mesh that you see here. Mid Poly Mesh will subdivide it. And yeah, let's go ahead and choose our specular workflow, and you can see the export constructor is set up differently. If you need to add an additional map, you can do so by choosing Add Texture, and then you can name it accordingly. You can choose the file type if you don't like TGAs, if you prefer PNGs, for example. You could choose that here. It's also worth noting, if you have an ambient occlusion layer, you may want to export that as a separate map. To do that, you would need to first hide the ambient occlusion layer, because otherwise, if it's visible, 3D Coat is going to assume you want to bake ambient occlusion with the color map or the diffuse map. So it's going to bake it all together if you leave this visible. I'm going to let 3D Coat bake the occlusion with the diffuse in this example, but to keep it separate, I would need to first hide the layer, then add a texture map to the constructor. And if you want to keep that as a new preset, then what you can do is either save it or create a new preset from this and rename it accordingly. So I will hit OK. Let's go back to Modo. I want to ensure that we first decide how it's brought in. It's not replacing anything, so I want to make sure that Add as a new mesh item is chosen. And I check Import Materials and Textures, and I choose the appropriate preset. In this instance, I'll use the default Advanced or Physical Modo material, and then click the Pull button when I am ready to import. Let's skip forward just a little bit while I scale the model down. It came in quite large. Now I'm going to switch to the advanced viewport. See how close we are to the actual render, the advanced viewport. Now let's go ahead and give it a render. Let me go ahead and send it back to shaded. We can see that our materials are set up by UV map. You can see the different maps that were brought in: roughness, specular amount, spec color, normal, and diffuse. I should also mention one thing that I've noticed, and that is when you are rendering with ProRender, it seems to prefer the principled shader model rather than the physical model. If I were to switch to physically based shader model, you can see how much different that is. Let me go ahead and control click on the material for each one of these, and then I'll just change it back to principled. Now, if we wanted to make some additional changes to our textures in 3D Coat and just update the texture maps only, we would uncheck the import mesh option in the Applink panel and then repeat the earlier steps that we took. And with that, we will conclude this overview of the new Applink connection plugin for Modo. In a separate video, we will explore the export options in greater detail, so stay tuned and thank you for watching.